My name is Ryan Caldwell, and I'm 27 years old. If you asked my parents to describe me, they'd probably say I was the difficult child. Not because I got in trouble or made poor choices, actually, quite the opposite. I always held down steady jobs, paid my own bills, and managed my life like an adult. But to them, that somehow turned me into the family's emergency hotline, the one who could handle things every time someone else messed up. And by someone else, I mean my older sister, Rachel. Rachel was 30, but you'd never know it by how she lived. She had cycled through more jobs than I could count, never lasting more than a few months before she had a new excuse, a boss who hated her coworkers, who were toxic, or some vague crisis that prevented her from focusing. She always seemed to find someone to lean on. Sometimes a new friend with a spare couch, sometimes our parents, who continued to treat her like she was a delicate flower instead of a fully grown adult. I learned early on that if I wanted a peaceful life, I'd have to keep my distance. I didn't hate Rachel. I just knew what proximity meant. It meant getting dragged into her messes, usually with some guilt-laced speech from my mother about how family supports each other. And of course, because I had a good job, because I had my own apartment in Denver, that meant I was lucky enough to help. That's why I built my walls. Boundaries weren't optional, they were necessary. I thought I had made them clear, made it obvious that I was not going to be Rachel's backup plan anymore. But I was wrong. I didn't realize that my parents weren't respecting my boundaries. They were just waiting for the right moment to bulldoze them. And that moment came at a family dinner, one I almost skipped. Looking back, I should have known something was up the second I walked through the door. My mom was being unusually warm. My dad barely made eye contact. Rachel didn't even say hello. I didn't know it yet, but I was walking straight into the setup. Dinner started out like most awkward family gatherings: tight smiles, shallow small talk, and my mom's thinly veiled jabs disguised as concern. "It's been ages since we've seen you, Ryan," she said, passing the green beans with theatrical sweetness. "Always so busy in that little apartment of yours." I gave the usual non-committal nod, kept my focus on the food. My dad stayed mostly quiet, sipping his drink and occasionally grunting in agreement. Rachel, seated across from me, barely looked up from her phone. For a few minutes, I let myself believe I might get through the evening without a scene. I should have known better. Halfway through the meal, just as I was starting to relax, my mom set down her fork and folded her hands with the precision of someone about to deliver a speech rehearsed in the mirror. "So, Ryan," she said, using that sing-song tone. I knew all too well the one that always preceded a favor, or a favor disguised as a decision already made. "We've been talking, and your sister's going to move in with you for a little while." I didn't respond right away. My fork paused midair. I glanced around the table. My mom looked expectant. My dad suddenly found interest in his mashed potatoes. Rachel stared at her plate like this was just another Tuesday. I didn't say a word, not yet. Mom took my silence as an invitation to continue. "She's had a really tough few months, and while you've got that nice place all to yourself, it just makes sense. You can help her get back on her feet, and she won't be a burden on us." There it was, the real reason. A burden not on them, shifted onto me like it always had been. Dad cleared his throat. "It's not like you can't afford it, Ryan. She just needs a stable place, some time to figure things out." Still, I said nothing. Then Rachel finally chimed in with a voice just a little too smooth, a little too prepared. "It'll only be a few months. I can help around the apartment and stuff too." That was laughable. We all knew Rachel's definition of help meant taking over the couch and not lifting a finger. But I didn't push back, not yet. Instead, I waited. I let them all believe they'd gotten what they wanted. I let the silence hang heavy in the air, let them squirm. Because I wasn't just deciding how to respond, I was watching them commit to the mistake. The silence stretched just long enough to make them uncomfortable. I could feel their eyes flickering toward me, waiting for a reaction, expecting resistance. Maybe they thought I'd argue, raise my voice, accuse them of putting me in an impossible position. But I didn't do any of that. Instead, I exhaled slowly, set my fork down with quiet finality, and gave a small nod. "Okay," I said. The room froze. My mom blinked, surprised, like she hadn't expected me to agree without a fight. My dad looked cautiously relieved, his shoulders sagging slightly. Rachel. Rachel smirked. That's when I knew she'd been in on it from the start. The way she leaned back in her chair, all smug and satisfied, as if she'd just checkmated me with 2 moves. She didn't even try to hide it. "Really?" Mom asked, narrowing her eyes, trying to read me. I shrugged. Sure, if it helps Rachel get her life back on track, I don't see the harm. That was all it took. Suddenly, my mom was beaming, launching into a long rehearsed speech about how proud she was of me for stepping up as a brother. My dad nodded along like some kind of wise patriarch. Rachel stayed quiet, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was already mentally moving into my apartment, deciding where to put her bags, imagining how she'd rearrange my space to suit her comfort. And why wouldn't she? She'd done it before. She used to sneak into my room and take my stuff without asking. Clothes, electronics, you name it. In college, she borrowed my laptop and never gave it back. When she got her first apartment and couldn't pay rent, our parents leaned on me to help her out just once, they said. But it never was. Rachel wasn't just irresponsible, she was manipulative, a professional victim, always crafting some tragic version of the story that made her look helpless and made me look heartless if I didn't comply. But this time she had no idea what I had planned. So I leaned forward just a bit, kept my tone casual. "When is she moving in?" Mom lit up. "We were thinking this weekend. That way she has time to settle in and start job hunting again." This weekend, I repeated. "Perfect." Rachel stretched, smiling. "I don't have much stuff anyway, just a few boxes and clothes. It won't take long." I smiled back. "Sounds good. Just let me know what time. I'll be there." And I meant it. I'd absolutely be there. Not at the apartment, of course. Somewhere better, watching everything unfold from a distance. The moment I stepped out of my parents' house that night, I dropped the performance. No more fake smiles, no more polite nods, just pure, focused silence. I drove home well to what my parents and Rachel still believed was my home and smiled the entire way. Because what they didn't know was that I hadn't lived in that apartment for weeks. I'd sold it. The deal closed 2 Fridays ago, and the keys were already with the new tenant, a guy named Marcus who just moved to Boulder, Colorado from Chicago. He was quiet, worked in IT, and probably had no idea the chaos heading his way. I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. You see, this wasn't some last-minute retaliation. I hadn't sold the place just to spite Rachel. I'd been planning the move for a while. A better job offer had come up in Fort Collins and I had taken it. New city, fresh start, no strings attached. But when that dinner happened, when my parents tried to hand over my life like it was theirs to distribute, I knew the timing was perfect. I didn't owe them a warning. They never asked. They just assumed. So I let them keep assuming. The days leading up to the move-in were some of the most amusing ones of my adult life. I went about my routine as if nothing had changed, chatted casually with my mom when she texted, sent Rachel a thumbs up emoji when she mentioned packing up, never said a word about the sale or the fact that they were about to show up at an apartment I no longer owned. I had no intention of being there when they did. I imagined it constantly, the car pulling into the driveway, Rachel bouncing up with a box of mismatched shoes, my mom carrying pillows, my dad grumbling while unloading luggage. Then, confusion, then panic, then the slow dawning horror as they realized the locks were changed and someone else lived there. It played in my head like a movie, a dark comedy with them as the stars. Saturday was the day, and I was ready. Saturday arrived like clockwork. I spent the morning sipping coffee at a bookstore downtown reading a novel I'd started months ago, but never had the peace to finish. The sun filtered through the windows, warming the pages. My phone sat face down on the table beside me. I wasn't going to miss this. Around noon it buzzed. Once, then again, unknown number, voicemail, then a call from Mom's contact photo. I let it ring. I could imagine the scene, Rachel stepping out of the car, bags in hand, walking up to the door only to find a stranger living there. Marcus probably opened the door, confused, startled by the crowd. My parents trying to explain, Rachel insisting, then realization hitting like a brick wall. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I picked up on the third try, forcing my voice to stay light. "Hello, Ryan?" My mom snapped, her voice tight with panic. "What's going on?" I blinked innocently. "Sorry, what do you mean?" "We just got to the apartment. The landlord says it was sold weeks ago. Someone else is living here now." I paused, letting the moment stretch. "Huh, that's strange. I didn't realize you were heading there today." "You knew," she hissed. "You knew Rachel was moving in." "Did I asked, my tone feather light. "I don't recall agreeing to anything specific. We just talked about it over dinner." "You said it was fine," my dad barked in from the background. "We packed up all her stuff." "Well," I said, leaning back in my chair, "that sounds like a miscommunication." I could hear Rachel now, her voice shrill and frantic in the background. "I told you we should have double-checked. He tricked us." Mom's voice cracked. "You sold the apartment. You didn't even tell us." "It was a last-minute opportunity," I said smoothly. "Didn't think it was that important. Besides, no one asked." The silence on the other end was heavy, broken only by the muffled sound of frustration. My dad tried again, his tone more desperate now. "What are we supposed to do, Ryan? We're here with all her things. You can't just spring this on us." I sighed. "I assumed you'd figure it out. You're always telling me how resourceful you are." "Ryan, be serious," my mom snapped. "I am," I replied. I moved on. Maybe it's time you all did too. And with that, I ended the call, setting my phone down as calmly as I had picked it up. This wasn't revenge, this was truth, and it was just beginning. I thought that might be the end of it. Wishful thinking. By that evening, I had returned to my new apartment, smaller, simpler, but mine. No obligations, no uninvited guests. I was halfway through unpacking a box of books when I heard the knock. 3 sharp raps, no doorbell. I froze for a second, then walked calmly to the peephole. There they were, my parents, Rachel, and the trunk of their car still popped open behind them, full of luggage boxes and bags spilling onto the curb like a sitcom gone wrong. They had found me. I didn't panic. In fact, I smiled. They had no idea this was my new place. They thought they were pulling off a desperate recovery mission. What they didn't know was that this time I wasn't the one caught off guard. I opened the door slowly. My mom stepped forward first, her voice pleading but tinged with accusation. "Ryan, we tried calling. You didn't answer. We figured out where you moved. We need to talk." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Oh, and how exactly did you figure that out?" My dad stepped in, his voice sharper. "Never mind that. Look, we need to fix this. You said Rachel could move in. She's got her stuff, we're here, so can we just stop the games?" I blinked. "You're mistaken." What? Rachel barked from behind them. "I never said she could move in here," I said flatly. "You assumed that. You said she could move in," my dad growled. "Now you're acting like we don't even exist." I shrugged. "You made plans without confirmation. That's on you." Rachel moved forward now, her voice rising. "I don't care what your little boundaries are, Ryan. I'm your sister. You're seriously going to throw me out like I'm nothing?" "You were never invited in," I replied, "and being related to me doesn't entitle you to free rent." The tension rippled through the air. My mom looked like she was about to cry. My dad was seething. Rachel. She was glaring like she was ready to force her way past me. That's when I calmly reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "What are you doing?" my dad asked, his voice suddenly cautious. I held up the screen. "If any of you try to come inside, I'll call the police. This is my home. You're not welcome here. And this isn't a discussion." "You're seriously going to call the cops on your own family?" my mom whispered. I nodded. "If it means protecting my space and my peace, absolutely." And in that moment, they realized this wasn't the old Ryan. This was the one who wasn't afraid of saying no. Rachel stepped closer, defiant. Her arms were crossed, her jaw clenched, and her glare could have cut through glass. "If you don't let me in," she said, her voice shaking with fury, "then we'll make you." "This is insane, Ryan." My dad looked ready to back her up. My mom hovered behind them both, clearly hoping I'd crack like I always used to. Like I'd suddenly remember I was family and fold under the pressure. But I didn't. I raised the phone to my ear and calmly dialed. 911, what's your emergency?" the operator asked. "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "I need to report a trespassing situation. My parents and sister are attempting to enter my residence without permission. I've asked them to leave. They're refusing." That stopped them cold. My mom gasped. Rachel took a step back. My dad's voice turned sharp. "You're calling the cops on us. You're really doing this." "I gave you a chance to walk away," I replied without looking at him. 5 minutes later, I heard the distant sound of sirens. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel fear at the tension, not from them, not from the moment. I felt something else. Relief. A squad car pulled up to the curb. A female officer stepped out, cool and composed, scanning the situation. She looked at me first. "Are you the caller?" I nodded. "Yes, ma'am. They came uninvited and refused to leave." She turned to my parents. "Is that true?" My dad stammered. "He's our son. We thought he'd let his sister move in. He agreed. He said she could." "I never gave them access to this address," I interjected. "They tracked me down and showed up with her belongings, expecting to move in." Rachel jumped in. "He told us at dinner that it was fine." The officer raised an eyebrow. "And do you live here?" "No, but..." "Then you need to leave. This is private property. Verbal expectations don't override the resident's right to say no." My mom's voice cracked. "But we're his family. We just need a place for Rachel. Just for a little while." "I understand, ma'am," the officer replied, her voice firm but professional. "But family or not, you can't force entry into someone's home. If you don't leave now, we'll be required to take legal action." The air went still. For once, they were speechless. Rachel looked like she might scream. My dad's face twisted in silent rage. My mom looked defeated. And me, I stood tall, not smug, not cruel, just unshakable. They turned slowly, gathering Rachel's bags, and walked back toward the car without another word. No yelling, no apology, just stunned silence. The officer turned to me. "If they return, don't hesitate to call." "Thank you," I said. She gave a nod, then left. And just like that, the storm passed. But the calm that followed, it felt earned. After the police car pulled away and their taillights vanished into the street, I closed the door slowly. Then I locked it. Deadbolt, chain, peace. I stood there for a moment, hand resting on the doorknob, soaking in the silence. No shouting, no banging, no guilt-trip speeches bleeding through the walls. Just quiet. For the first time in years, my home felt like mine. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt light. Like someone had finally cut the rope I didn't even realize had been wrapped around my chest for most of my adult life. I made tea, sat on my couch, let my body sink into the cushions. It wasn't until I glanced at my phone, 12 missed calls, 7 voicemails, and a flood of messages from numbers I knew by heart, that I realized just how hard they were trying to regain control. But I didn't open a single one. I wasn't interested in explanations, apologies wrapped in manipulation, or desperate last-minute appeals. I wasn't their lifeline anymore. I didn't need to be. The next morning, I blocked every number. I deleted every voicemail. I unfollowed them all on social media, unsubscribed from the constant stream of subtle guilt and veiled comments. My phone, once a portal to stress, was suddenly clean, untethered. In the days that followed, I started reclaiming things. I cooked meals I liked without anyone judging the ingredients or mocking my grocery list. I took long walks after work through my new neighborhood in Fort Collins, noticing the way the leaves crunched beneath my shoes, instead of worrying about whether my sister was about to drain my savings again. I even started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. My easel had been buried in a closet, half forgotten. Now it stood in front of the window, sunlight warming the canvas as I added color without permission. Freedom didn't arrive with fireworks. It was subtle, a slow, steady return to myself. I realized I had spent so many years bracing for the next favor, the next just this once request, that I hadn't noticed how little of my life belonged to me. Until now. I hadn't just shut a door on my family. I had opened one to my own future. It took about 2 weeks before I heard from them again. This time it came in the form of a letter, not a handwritten one, but a long, clunky email from my mother's subject line in all caps, "You can't just cut us off." I didn't open it right away. I sat with it for a while, staring at the screen, then clicked it open out of curiosity, not concern. It was everything I expected: emotional manipulation, guilt, and polished victimhood. "We're hurt, Ryan. We don't understand how you could embarrass us like that. You've always been so cold. Rachel didn't deserve to be treated like that." Not once did they ask how I was. Not once did they reflect on what they'd done. They weren't looking for reconciliation. They were looking for compliance. I archived the message. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. A week later, Rachel posted a vague message on her Instagram story. "Some people only pretend to care about family when it's convenient." I laughed, quietly, the kind of laugh that isn't amused, just finished. They could spin whatever story they wanted. I had nothing left to prove. My new life unfolded quietly. No drama, no emergencies, just work art, late-night walks, real conversations with friends who didn't ask for money in the same breath as a "how are you?" I realized I didn't need an apology to move on. I didn't need them to admit they were wrong. I just needed to stop waiting for them to become people they'd never tried to be. One evening, I sat on my balcony as the Colorado sky shifted from gold to violet. The air was cool, crisp. My mug of tea steamed in my hands. I watched the city hum gently beneath me, headlights flickering like fireflies. I thought about the version of myself who once would have dropped everything for a single guilt-laced phone calls. He was gone. In his place stood someone calm, someone whole, someone finally living on his own terms. I didn't know what the future held for my family and me, and for once I didn't need to. Because for the first time, I wasn't waiting on them to give me peace. I had already claimed it.